Jamie McMahon and Christopher Kaufman were once considered quiet, likable young men by those who knew them well. Everyone thought they were just good guys. But out of the blue, they shocked their friends and family by unleashing a spree of kidnappings and murders that shook the small rural town of Gibson in Iowa. So, what led to such a drastic change in their behavior? Those who knew them say the answer lies in methamphetamines. Meth, a highly addictive stimulant that affects the central nervous system, became easily accessible in the population around 1997. Originally developed in the early 20th century from amphetamine, it was used in nasal decongestants and bronchial inhalers. This drug causes hyperactivity, non-stop talking, and a false sense of happiness and euphoria. In their crime spree, McMahon and Kaufman brutally murdered two women in what seemed like an execution-style killing. They also attempted to rob a bank, kidnapped two girls, and then vanished, leading the FBI on a lengthy manhunt across 6 states. This case has gone down in history as one of the most horrible in the United States. Jamie Gerald McMahon and Chris Michael Kaufman were born in small towns in Mahaska County, Iowa. McMahon's mother and Kaufman's father got together in 1979 and eventually married. The boys grew up together in Oskaloosa, Iowa, a city of then about 10,000 people. In 1997, Jamie was 22 and Chris was 18. McMahon was the outgoing, charismatic, and attractive older brother, while Kaufman was a quiet, non-athletic man. Kaufman had just graduated from high school with apparently few prospects and a group of friends who ran the streets, and McMahon had recently lost his job at a local plant. By the start of the summer, the 22-year-old McMahon was hanging out with 18-year-old Kaufman and his high school-age friends, and both were doing drugs. Friends and family described them as good kids who suddenly started to change. A few months before June 1997, Jamie began showing signs of personality changes. Soon after, he started spending a lot of time with his stepbrother Chris. This was surprising because, although they lived close by, they weren't part of the same social circle and hadn't been in close contact before. Suddenly, they were inseparable. It's unclear exactly when, but both began using methamphetamine, which their friends and family believe led them to commit horrific crimes. In the days leading up to their crime spree, the stepbrothers had been using meth and went almost a week without sleeping or eating. In fact, the night before the crimes, they partied with several girls at a hotel. That led up to Wednesday, June 11, 1997, when they embarked on a 4.5-hour-long rampage across south-central Iowa. Their first crime took place at a rural farm in What Cheer, Iowa, where 52-year-old Barbara Garber lived alone. Chris, apparently goaded by his brother, shot her directly in the forehead without hesitation or remorse. Barbara was then shot 3 more times at close range while seated in an armchair. She didn't resist, and there were no signs of forced entry. Afterward, Jamie and Chris fled in Garber's new vehicle, a dark green 1997 Dodge Dakota pickup truck, a model Jamie had always wanted but could never afford. Barbara was later found dead in her living room by her boss, who was concerned about her unusual absence from work. She was fully dressed, reclining on her left side as blood poured from her head wounds. Next to her feet lay her breakfast and a coffee cup. Neighbors were interviewed by investigators after Barbara's body was discovered. One neighbor reported seeing an unfamiliar blue car in Barbara's driveway early that morning as she left for work, but she didn't see anyone inside or take note of the license plate. The second murder and theft by the stepbrothers took place in rural Gibson. They went to the home of 18-year-old Eileen Schultz and shot her twice in the head at close range. This time, it was Jamie who pulled the trigger, ending the life of the young woman. Her mother had died in 1985 when Eileen was just 6 years old. Raised by her grandparents in the rural town of Gibson, Eileen had just graduated from high school a month before her murder. She worked part-time as a babysitter and a grocery store clerk. On the morning of the crime, witnesses saw Barbara Garber's green truck parked outside the Schultz home around 9:30 a.m. The stepbrothers took Eileen's car next, using it to commit their third crime, the robbery of Gibson Savings Bank, which happened around 10 a.m. There were no customers or security guards at the bank at that time, just a cashier and the manager. Two masked robbers dressed in ski masks, gloves, and work clothes stormed in. Pointing a gun at the manager's head, one of them went straight to the safe, stuffing all the cash into plastic trash bags. They left the bank with $65,000. The police and the FBI were alerted immediately, and the investigation kicked off without delay. Though the robbers wore masks, bank employees described them as white males. Unfortunately, the bank had no security cameras, making it harder for investigators to gather evidence beyond witness statements. An additional witness, a 10-year-old girl riding her bike on the street, saw two masked men carrying bags as they exited a gray car and entered the bank. She quickly rode away before the criminals left the scene. Investigators issued an alert for the car. About 2 miles from the bank in rural Gibson, behind some grain containers, the stepbrothers ditched Eileen's gray car and continued their escape in the pickup truck of their first victim. A police officer found the abandoned vehicle and soon identified it as belonging to Eileen Schultz. Heading to the Schultz home nearby, the officer found Eileen on the floor with a gunshot wound, dead. Beside her lay an audio cassette and 2.22 caliber bullets, the same type used in the murder of Barbara Garber. There were no signs of forced entry or defensive wounds. For the authorities, it was easy to link the three crimes that occurred in less than 2.5 hours and within 5 miles of each other, especially in a town where such incidents were extremely rare. Ballistic analysis later confirmed that both Barbara and Eileen were killed with the same weapon, a .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol. The massive attention from the media and the panic in the community drove the police and FBI to intensify their investigation. Officers received hundreds of calls with tips related to the case. One came from a young person who saw the green truck with 2 men on board in Oskaloosa. Another witness in Oskaloosa reported seeing a young man from the town between 10:30 and 11 a.m. on June 11th, driving a truck that had not been seen before. It was Jamie who was seen driving around in the blue car. There was another passenger, but the witness couldn't get a good look at them. By the end of that day, investigators had Jamie's name and a description of one of the suspects. The next day, they arrived at the last known address of Jamie McMahon, his parents' house in Oskaloosa. His parents mentioned they hadn't seen him since the day of the crime and shared that his stepbrother Chris, who had been inseparable from Jamie in recent weeks, was also missing. Jamie's friends told the police that they had seen the two stepbrothers together the night before the crimes, driving a blue car. This matched the vehicle that a neighbor had seen early in the morning outside Barbara Garber's house. A friend of Jamie's also revealed that on the day before the crimes, Jamie had come to his house with Christopher and had asked to borrow something unusual, a gun. He handed over a .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol. This information sparked a massive search for the stepbrothers and the green truck they were traveling in. The search spanned over 1,000 miles across 6 states, keeping Americans on edge and the community of Gibson terrified. Mandy, 17, and Amanda, 16, best friends from Oskaloosa, were reported missing by their parents the night before the brothers' crime spree. Unbeknownst to their families, Mandy and Amanda had been at the party Jamie and Chris threw at a hotel in Oskaloosa the night before the crimes. The next morning, June 11th, while the girls were still asleep, the young men carried out the murders and the bank robbery. After the crime spree, the stepbrothers picked up the girls from the hotel in the stolen green truck. They offered the girls a free trip to Florida, which the impressed teenagers accepted without asking many questions. At one point during their trip, they stopped at a river where the fugitives threw a bag into the water. Together, the 4 young people visited Branson, Missouri, and Walt Disney World. For the girls, it seemed like a fun vacation. After 7 days, Jamie and Chris confessed to the girls about the crimes they had committed. At the same time, Jamie reached out to his ex-girlfriend to find out what the police knew about him. Unbeknownst to him, one of the FBI's strategies was to place a device on the girl's phone to record and trace any calls from the fugitive. Although Jamie hung up quickly, the conversation lasted long enough for the FBI to trace the number. The police located him at a hotel in Florida, where staff confirmed that the young men had been there with the 2 teenagers, Mandy and Amanda. After their wild escapade, they had already left the scene. In an attempt to evade recognition, Chris even dyed his hair. 3 days later, in a drug-induced state, Jamie told Mandy and Amanda that he wouldn't mind killing them too. Terrified by this threat, the girls told them they wanted to go home. After some argument, Jamie reluctantly gave them money for a taxi and train fare back home. Once back in Oskaloosa, the girls went straight to the police and explained that as soon as they wanted to leave after finding out about the crimes, Jamie and Chris had held them captive. They were finally set free after 10 days. The girls claimed they had no idea where the stepbrothers were headed next. Soon after, there was a new discovery. An officer found in the A River the bag the stepbrothers had thrown away. Inside were the ski masks and work clothes Jamie McMahon and Chris Kaufman had worn during the bank robbery, as well as Island's wallet with her ID. The fugitive stepbrothers managed to evade a nationwide manhunt for about 3 weeks. There were sightings as far away as Texas and Minnesota. On June 30th, 1997, 19 days after the crimes, a man in Pensacola, Florida, called the police to report a 1997 green Dodge Dakota, the same vehicle the authorities were searching for. He said the driver looked just like Jamie McMahon. The caller even recognized the license plate while driving on Interstate 10. The case gained national attention after the vehicle, and a description of the crimes were broadcast twice on America's Most Wanted, leading to their identification. Immediately, the county police started a thorough search for the vehicle. An officer found the truck at a motel. The stepbrothers had removed the front license plate in an attempt to confuse the authorities, but it was indeed the vehicle they were looking for. The police questioned the receptionist who, upon seeing their photos, confirmed that the 2 young men were staying there. However, she added that there was a third man with them. Fearing that the fugitives might have taken a new hostage, officers evacuated the motel. A SWAT team along with negotiators arrived, snipers were positioned, and officers surrounded the area. A negotiator called the room's phone and the unidentified man answered. It quickly became clear he was not a hostage. He informed the officers that he had met the stepbrothers a few days ago while hitchhiking and had been partying with them. He explained that Jamie and Chris had been awake for 4 days, high on methamphetamines, and were now finally asleep. The man on the phone was shocked to learn that they were murderers and that they were armed. As the frightened man was unsure what to do, and the negotiator was trying to persuade him to leave the room, The stepbrothers woke up. Jamie grabbed the phone and the officer asked him to let the innocent man go. After 2 hours of tense negotiations, the man finally walked out of the room with his hands up. He had met the fugitives in New Orleans and spent a couple of days with them. He reported that the room was filled with lots of money and drugs, and as far as he could see, there was only one gun. The negotiator managed to speak with Chris over the phone, who was very tired and not in a clear state of mind to make decisions. Therefore, the negotiator turned back to Jamie and asked him to help his younger brother out of this situation. Jamie did just that, convincing Chris to leave the room with his hands raised. Only Jamie remained, exhausted, continuously handling the gun as if contemplating suicide and feeling utterly lost. He sought help over the phone from the negotiator. The officer convinced him to try to stay alive and surrender. Finally, he did. After 4 grueling hours, Jamie McMahon surrendered to the authorities, ending a lengthy chase that had taken him and his stepbrother across 6 states. The authorities searched the room, recovering $29,000 of the $65,000 stolen from the bank and the .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol. Empty beer bottles, marijuana, and methamphetamines rounded out the grim scene. Over 3 weeks, the stepbrothers had blown through $36,000 on drugs, hotels, and women. Back in Iowa, McMahon and Kaufman faced charges of first-degree murder and robbing a federal bank. They returned to a community that had been deeply concerned and frightened while awaiting their capture. Chris confessed to the crimes to the authorities, thinking that doing so might preempt his stepbrother from pinning both murders on him. Looking gaunt after weeks of heavy drug use, Kaufman gave a 95-minute interview where he insisted that the timing of the crimes hadn't been well planned and that they killed the women simply to eliminate potential witnesses. He claimed it was Jamie's idea to rob the bank and that they needed a car for the job. Jamie had already set his sights on Barbara Garber's truck, which he liked and wanted for their crimes. Barbara knew Jamie, which is why she let them into her house. As soon as she did, Chris pulled out the gun and ordered Barbara to sit down. Jamie repeatedly urged his brother to do it, and the young 18-year-old simply complied. Chris admitted to shooting 52-year-old Barbara Garber 4 times in the head. He claimed he did it to prevent her from reporting the theft of her truck. He described the brutal murders casually, as if discussing the weather, in a monotonous tone to an agent from Iowa's Criminal Investigation Division. "I just sat there for a while and then I did it," he explained. When asked how he felt about killing the 52-year-old grandmother, Chris admitted to feeling a bit guilty, but ultimately felt that all he had to do was pull the trigger. Since Jamie was particularly fond of Barbara's truck, they decided to steal a different car to rob the bank, then abandon it to continue their escape in the pickup. McMahon decided to visit another acquaintance island. She let them in after Jamie asked to borrow money supposedly for gas. She gave them $5, and as she turned around to put a cassette in the music player, Jamie shot her in the back of the head. To make sure she was dead, he shot her again between the eyes after she had fallen to the floor. Then they took the car keys and the wallet of Island and finally fled. Chris strongly denied having shot Island, and the authorities confirmed that it was Jamie who took the life of the 18-year-old, which he later admitted in court. When asked if he would do it all over again, Chris said he probably wouldn't do exactly the same thing. "I wouldn't kill anyone," he stated. The young man requested a psychiatric evaluation, asserting that he knew he could be capable of killing someone in prison if they tried to bother him. The stepbrothers were each sentenced to 5 life terms after pleading guilty to first-degree murder, car theft, and armed bank robbery. They agreed to plead guilty on the condition that federal prosecutors would not seek the death penalty. The father of the stepbrothers insisted that both Jamie and Chris were good kids at heart. "If they did this, we feel drugs were the cause. That's the only thing that could have been," he he said. Methamphetamine use was on the rise in the region around that time. In 1997, Iowa was identified as one of the top 5 states in the U.S. where the use of methamphetamine. Known as the poor man's cocaine, it began to gain followers in the working-class areas of southeast Iowa due to its ease of manufacture and relative affordability. Health experts note that methamphetamine use can lead to paranoid behavior, weight loss, bad temper, and irritability. 20 years after the crimes, at 42 years old and having spent nearly half his life behind bars, Jamie McMahon decided to end his life. In November 2017, he was found unconscious in his cell. Authorities determined it was an apparent suicide. Despite immediate life-saving attempts by the medical staff, Jamie was declared dead at 10:30 a.m. Jamie and Chris's story is a stark reminder of how drugs can lead to disastrous and irreversible decisions. These guys wanted to endlessly extend their ecstasy from drugs, alcohol, parties, and women. To fund their lifestyle, they made the most insane decision to rob a bank. But then they needed a getaway car. And in that chain of poor choices, they murdered 2 women without any mercy to accomplish what they wanted. And that wraps up today's episode of Unreal True Crime. Don't forget to subscribe and hit like if you appreciate my work. Until next time. It was just past 1 in the morning on May 14, 1983, in Orange County, California. Officer Sterling and Sergeant Jaguar were on duty on the San Diego freeway when they spotted a brown Toyota Celica driving really weirdly. They went to pull the car over, and that's when they met him face to face. They didn't know it yet, but they were looking at the most wanted killer of the last 10 years. The man stood there, spilling beer on the ground and with his pants undone. He agreed to take a breathalyzer test, which he obviously failed. As they were about to arrest him for drunk driving, they felt something wasn't right, like they were missing something big. Sergeant Jaguar checked the car and found something that would haunt him forever. A young guy in the passenger seat, lifeless. This was the scene that the killer hadn't recorded in his secret list, which had more than 67 victims on it, victims who had faced unimaginable horrors. Randy Kraft was born on March 19, 1945, in Long Beach, California. He was the 4th kid and only the son of Opal Lee and Harold Herbert Kraft. Kraft's father had moved to California from Wyoming weeks after the American entry into World War II. Upon finding employment as a production operative at Douglas Aircraft Company, he was joined by his wife and 3 daughters. The Kraft family lived modestly, and Kraft's mother took several jobs to supplement her husband's assembly line salary. Kraft's mother took several jobs to supplement her husband's assembly line salary. Kraft's mother initially found employment as a seamstress in a Westminster garment factory before later obtaining employment as a cook in a local school. Nonetheless, Opal Kraft always found time for her children. In 1948, the Krafts moved to Westminster, Orange County. Kraft attended Midway City Elementary School, where his mother was a member of the PTA. As a student, his intelligence was noted by classmates and teachers. By 1957, Kraft was judged intelligent enough to attend accelerated classes at 17th Street Junior High School. After finishing high school in 1963, he went to Claremont Men's College in the small town of Claremont. Randy was into a lot of things there. He joined the Reserve Officers Training Corps and got really into politics. In 1964, he even supported the Vietnam War publicly and helped campaign for Barry Goldwater, the Republican presidential candidate. Randy also worked at a local gay bar and was so busy that he started taking Valium to help with his stomach and headaches. However, over time, his friends got worried about how much medicine he was using. His grades started to drop. He began drinking, played poker all night, and even failed his econometrics class, which delayed his graduation by 8 months. 1968 was a big year for Randy. He got his economics degree and shifted his political views from right-wing to more democratic, even working hard for Robert Kennedy. That same year, he joined the U.S. Air Force, aced the tests, and showed he was really smart with an IQ of 129. He got sent to Edwards Air Force Base in Kern County, California, a place with high security. But in 1969, Randy's life changed dramatically when he told his family and friends he was gay. They accepted him, but the military didn't, and he was forced to leave. Feeling down, Randy went back to bartending and later became a truck driver in Huntington Beach. He also started teaching courses at California State University, Long Beach. There, he met Jeff Graves, a younger guy from Minnesota. They started dating, and it looked like Randy was getting his life back on track. But he had a dark secret. In March 1970, while wandering around Huntington Beach, Randy met 13-year-old Joseph Alvin Fancher, who had run away from home. Randy invited him to live together, which seemed nice, but he had evil intentions. After bringing Joseph to his apartment, Randy drugged and attacked him. Joseph managed to escape while Randy was at work, and a passerby saw Joseph's bad state and called for help. Joseph was taken to the hospital, where he told the police about being drugged and beaten by Randy, but he didn't mention the abuse. The police went to Randy's apartment without a warrant, and fearing for their jobs, they decided not to press charges, leaving Randy free to offend again. By the end of 1971, the police found an unidentified, decomposed body on Ortega Highway. The victim was Wayne Joseph Duquette, a 30-year-old bartender. The autopsy indicated he died from alcohol poisoning on September 20th of that year. The investigation stalled, with no leads on Wayne's clothes, belongings, or his killer. On December 26, 1972, police on Highway 405 in Seal Beach found 20-year-old sailor Edward Daniel Moore's body. He was tied at the wrists and ankles, had a hit mark on his face, probably from a blunt instrument, bite marks, and shockingly, a sock stuffed in his rectum. It looked like he'd been thrown from a moving vehicle. 6 weeks later, on February 6th, police found a man's body, aged between 17 and 25, near the Terminal Island Freeway. He couldn't be identified, but like Edward Moore, he had a sock stuffed similarly. Police suspected the same killer was behind these crimes, but the culprit remained at large as more victims appeared. On April 9th, 17-year-old Kevin Clark Bailey was found beside a road in Huntington Beach. He had been castrated and sodomized. 13 days later, another dismembered body was found and given the name John Doe. On July 30th, 20-year-old Ronnie Jean Wiebe was found strangled, with marks suggesting he'd been restrained and hung before death. The year ended with another gruesome discovery on December 29th. 23-year-old art student Vincent Cruz Mestas was found dead in the San Bernardino Mountains. He was openly bisexual. As with several previous victims, one of the victim's socks had been forced into his rectum. Mestas's hands had been severed from his body and were never found. By November 1974, 5 more victims had been found beside or close to major roadways in Southern California, 3 of whom had been conclusively linked to the same killer. 2 of these victims, 20-year-old Malcolm Eugene Little and 19-year-old James Dale Reeves, had each been found beside a freeway with foreign objects inserted into their bodies, whereas the body of the 3rd victim, 18-year-old Marine Roger Edward Dickerson, bore evidence of bite marks much like several earlier victims. On January 3, 1975, Kraft abducted and murdered a 17-year-old high school student named John Liras. The youth was last seen boarding a bus in Long Beach. His strangled body was found the following day, discarded at Sunset Beach with a foreign object protruding from his anus. Drag marks along the beach close to where his body was found suggested that 2 individuals had carried Laras's body into the water. 2 weeks after this murder, on January 17th, the body of a 21-year-old named Craig Jonadis was found discarded in the parking lot of the Golden Sails Hotel near the Pacific Coast Highway and Loynes Drive in Long Beach. Jonadis had been strangled to death with a length of string, possibly a shoelace. By January 1975, a total of 14 victims, whose bodies had been found discarded across 4 separate counties over the previous 3 years, had been linked to the same killer. All the victims had been Caucasian males with similar physical characteristics. On March 29, 1975, Keith Crotwell and his friend Kent May left home to hitchhike south, unaware of the fate awaiting them. Kraft lured the 2 men from a Long Beach parking lot into his Ford Mustang. The youths were given beer and Valium as Kraft drove in a random, aimless manner around Belmont Shore and Seal Beach. The police started searching right away, and soon they got a tip from 2 young people. They said they saw Crotwell and May in a black and white Mustang speeding into a parking lot. The driver quickly leaned over, opened the passenger door, and pushed May out onto the ground. He was almost out of it, probably from drinking or drugs. They saw Crotwell slumped over the driver's shoulder before the car sped off into the night. A month later, they found Crotwell's head at a pier near Long Beach Harbor. The police scoured the city for clues to find the driver. They eventually got a name, Randy Kraft. On May 19th, he was questioned. He admitted picking up Crotwell but claimed he left him at a cafe and knew nothing more. He also said his car later crashed and he had to call a tow truck. Jeff, still his partner, backed up his story. The detectives didn't believe him, but the Los Angeles County prosecutors wouldn't charge him due to the lack of evidence and because they couldn't find the rest of Crotwell's body or determine how he died. So, Jeff was free again. After a cool-down period, his crime spree just got worse. On December 31st, he kidnapped 22-year-old Mark Hall, tied him to a tree in a canyon, abused him, cut off his private parts, stuffed them into his rectum, burned him with a lighter on the chest, nose, and cheeks, gouged out his eyes, and then attacked him with a broken bottle. As if that wasn't horrific enough, Kraft suffocated Mark by stuffing leaves and dirt into his throat. When the police found Mark's body, they were shocked, and the autopsy revealed he was alive for much of this ordeal. This led the police to profile the killer as highly intelligent, methodical, and organized, possibly with military background, noting the use of surgical tape on several victims' noses, a technique used in the military to prevent body decomposition after death. On January 24, 1976, investigators from different parts of Southern California gathered in Orange County to discuss how to proceed with the search. Meanwhile, Kraft was living a peaceful life. In the following months, he ended things with Jeff Graves and soon found new love in Jeff Seelig, a 19-year-old baker's apprentice. They moved to Laguna Hills, promised each other forever, and shared a passion for threesomes, often picking up people from highways for this. During this time, Kraft wasn't violent, and it seemed his relationship had quenched his thirst for blood. He went nearly a year without committing any crimes until he struck again on December 10th, killing 19-year-old Paul Joseph Fuchs. Though Fuchs's body was never found, his name was on Kraft's list of victims. Kraft lay low after that, but on April 16, 1978, he strangled Scott Michael Hughes after drugging him with Valium and removed one of his testicles. Hughes's body was found fully clothed except for his shoelaces. On June 11th, 23-year-old Roland Gerald Young was found near a San Diego highway, mutilated and stabbed, then thrown from a speeding vehicle. 8 days later, the body of Marine Richard Allen Keith was found in Moulton Parkway, showing signs of being tied up, with strangulation as the cause of death and alcohol in his system. Despite ongoing efforts, police couldn't pin down the killer or save the victims, including Keith Arthur Klingbeil, a 23-year-old found beside Interstate 5, strangled with his shoelaces. At the hospital, they discovered he had ingested large amounts of paracetamol and alcohol and had burn marks on his chest. He died shortly after. On September 29th, Richard Anthony Crosby, 20, was found dead under similar circumstances along Highway 71 in San Bernardino, having vanished the day before while hitchhiking. The California Strangler, as the media dubbed him, had the region in fear, with every officer on alert for the next crime. On November 12, 1978, trucker Michael Joseph Inderbeaton's body was found near the San Diego freeway, castrated like the others. In addition to having been castrated, Inderbeaton had been violated with a foreign object and had suffered burns similar to those inflicted on victim Mark Hall 2 years previously. The cause of death was listed as suffocation. Kraft's attacks became less frequent, with the next one occurring in July 1979 on a highway. Donnie Harold Crissell, a 20-year-old sailor, died from acute alcohol poisoning, with signs of being tied and tortured. 2 months later, parts of 21-year-old British tourist Keith Anthony Jackson were found in trash bags behind a Union 76 gas station in Long Beach. A sock was found inserted in his rectum. Only Jackson's head, torso, and left leg were ever found. 2 weeks later, on September 14th, the body of 19-year-old Gregory Wallace Jolly was found in Lake Arrowhead. Jolly had been emasculated, and his head and legs had been severed after death. His possessions were later found in Kraft's home. On February 18, 1980, 19-year-old Mark Allen Marsh's body was dumped near Templin Highway, last seen hitchhiking to Buena Park. That summer, Kraft's job took him to Oregon, where he stayed in Portland and claimed 2 more victims. Michael Sean O'Fallon, a recent college graduate hitchhiking across the country, fell prey to Kraft, who drugged and strangled him, his body found near Salem. The following day, Kraft is believed to have killed a man estimated to be aged between 35 and 45 years old, whose body was found beside a freeway in the city of Woodburn. Kraft forced him to swallow a toxic level of Valium and paracetamol before strangling him with a cord. In September, Kraft returned to California and resumed his crimes, this time involving Robert Loggins, with whom he took incriminating photos. These photographs, which were subsequently found in Kraft's possession, show Loggins in Kraft's living room slumped fully clothed on his sofa, apparently intoxicated, and in various nude, pornographic postures. All these pictures depict Loggins with his eyes closed. It is unknown whether the victim was alive or dead when they were taken. On April 10, 1981, he kidnapped Michael Cluck while hitchhiking, brutally killing him with 31 blows to the head after assaulting him, and dumped his body near Interstate 5 in Oregon. 4 months later, the partially clothed body of male prostitute Christopher Allen Williams was discovered in the San Bernardino Mountains. He had ingested several drugs, and a paper towel stuffed in his nostrils caused him to choke on his own mucus. By early 1982, the relationship between Kraft and Selig had become marred by frequent fights and episodes of temporary separation. In an effort to resolve their personal differences, the couple began attending weekly counseling sessions in Huntington Beach. These sessions began on June 22, 1982. Then, the brutality of the killings escalated. Raymond Davis, just 14, disappeared while looking for his dog in Echo Park. 12 days later, he was found decomposed under leaves, wrists tied and shoelace around his neck. Nearby, 16-year-old Robert Avila was found dead under similar circumstances. He had been strangled to death with a length of stereo speaker wire. Kraft is not known to have killed again until November 1, 1982, when he abducted and murdered a 24-year-old Modesto man named Arna Mikial Lane. Lane was last seen hitchhiking towards Orange County in search of work. His body was not found until January 1984, discarded on a hillside close to the town of Ramona. 4 weeks after Lane's murder, the semi-nude body of 26-year-old Brian Witcher was dumped from a moving vehicle alongside the Interstate 5 freeway, close to the city of Wilsonville, Oregon. Witcher had ingested high levels of both alcohol and Valium, but he died of asphyxiation. On December 3, 1982, 29-year-old Anthony Jose Silveira vanished while hitchhiking. 2 weeks later, his body was found, showing the same signs as previous victims. After this murder, Randy left on business, returning with Silveira's military jacket, ready for more victims. Before returning, he stopped in Michigan, staying at the Grand Rapids Hotel where he met Dennis Alt and Christopher Schoenborn. He drugged and assaulted them, then murdered Dennis by suffocation and Christopher by strangling him with a belt after inserting a pen into Christopher's urethra. Their bodies were found on December 9, 1982, in a field near the hotel. Kraft left Schoenborn's keys and Silveira's jacket in his room before fleeing. That month in Portland, he killed 19-year-old Lance Taggs by overdosing him with drugs and suffocating him with a sock in his windpipe. His body was discovered the following day, discarded alongside a rural road in Clackamas County, close to where the body of Witcher had been found just 2 weeks earlier. Eric Church, 21, last seen hitchhiking from Orange County to Sacramento, was found dead along Interstate 605, suffering similar tortures to Dennis and Christopher, but with signs of struggling against his restraints. He died from strangulation and severe head injuries. On February 12, 1983, Kraft killed 2 Buena Park men, 18-year-old Jeffrey Nelson and 20-year-old Roger Duvall. The 2 young men were last seen outside the house of a friend named Bryce Wilson shortly after midnight when they told Wilson they intended to purchase something to eat. Kraft continued these heinous acts, unaware that his luck was about to change dramatically. It was 1:10 a.m. on May 14, 1983, when Officer Sterling and Sergeant Howard spotted a brown Toyota Celica driving erratically on the San Diego freeway in Orange County. They pulled it over, and out stepped Randy Kraft, casually tossing a beer bottle onto the pavement. Officer Sterling noticed Kraft's pants were undone, which was really odd. He had Kraft do some sobriety tests, which he clearly failed, so they arrested him for drunk driving. Meanwhile, Sergeant Howard approached the Celica and observed a young man slumped with his eyes closed in the vehicle's passenger seat, partially covered by a jacket. Several empty Moosehead beer bottles and an open prescription bottle of lorazepam tablets were strewn around his feet. Howard attempted to wake the man. Receiving no response, Howard attempted to rouse the man by shaking his arm, only to note the individual had a low body temperature. Upon checking for a pulse, Howard noted the man was dead, with a ligature mark visible around his neck. Lifting the jacket from the victim's lap, Howard noted the victim's jeans had been opened to expose his genitalia. In addition, the victim's hands had been bound with a shoelace, and his wrists bore evidence of welt marks. Later identified as Terry Lee Gambrell, a 25-year-old Marine stationed at El Toro Air Base, the victim had been strangled to death. Searching the car, Howard also found lots of damning evidence: alcohol, tranquilizers, various prescriptions, and an envelope with over 47 eerie photos showing young men in explicit, lifeless poses. Plus, there was blood on the passenger seat, but it wasn't Gambrell's since he had no open wounds. Howard had a hunch they had caught the California Strangler. They took Kraft to the sheriff's department and searched his house, finding clothes and belongings of many young men whose bodies had been found over the years, along with more photos of unconscious or dead men. But the most shocking find was Kraft's coded list of 61 victims, including 4 double murders, totaling 65 young men. Gambrell was not on the list since his death led to Kraft's arrest. After matching the list with discovered bodies, the count reached 67, clearly indicating Kraft needed to face the harshest penalty. The California Strangler was charged with 15 murders between December 1972 and May 1983, after over 700 witnesses were interviewed and more than 250 pieces of evidence were presented. The trial began on September 26, 1988, where Kraft pleaded not guilty but was convicted and sentenced to death on November 29, 1989. Following a moratorium in California, his sentence was changed to life without parole. While his capture brought peace to the region, it left an unresolved question. Did he have an accomplice? Some details of Kraft's crime suggested he might not have acted alone. On one hand, forensic evidence in 2 cases revealed an extra set of fingerprints and DNA that didn't match the California Strangler. On the other, it seemed unlikely that Kraft could have moved bodies weighing up to 200 pounds alone, and it was even more suspicious that he kept them in his car for long periods without anyone noticing. Moreover, the photos Kraft had of the murdered men had to be developed somewhere over the years, yet no photo lab ever reported these images to the police. Initially, it was thought Kraft might have developed them himself, but he lacked a darkroom and the necessary skills. Suspicion fell on Jeff Graves, Kraft's ex-partner, but he died before the police could question him, leaving the mystery unsolved. However, a breakthrough seemed to come years later when Bob Jackson claimed to have the answers. After Dennis McDougal published his book Angel of Darkness about the California Strangler in 1991, Jackson contacted him, confessing to killing 2 hitchhikers with Kraft, one in Wyoming in 1975 and another in Colorado in 1976. However, authorities in both states said they couldn't verify these claims. Jackson insisted he knew more about Kraft, claiming Kraft's list only included the most memorable murders and that the real number of victims was closer to 100. McDougal reported this to the police and provided interview recordings. The detectives questioned Jackson but didn't believe him. No murder charges were filed against him, and he was eventually persuaded to check into a psychiatric hospital. Jackson gained some notoriety when his claims were published in a Beach magazine article in January 2000. Meanwhile, Kraft sued McDougal and the Angel of Darkness publisher, claiming the book tarnished his reputation, portrayed him as sick and insane, and hindered his future job prospects, demanding $62 million in damages. The lawsuit was dismissed as frivolous in June 1994, ending the fabrications of the California Strangler. Kraft is still in prison. Despite most of the bodies being found, 22 remain unlocated. The California Strangler shows no interest in aiding the investigation or expressing remorse for his actions. His sadistic crimes are as shocking as his ability to evade capture for a decade, instilling terror and leaving a bloody stain across California. That's the end of today's episode of Unreal True Crime. We've dived deep into the shadows of humanity's darkest deeds, but remember, the truth is often stranger and more chilling than fiction. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a beat in our exploration of the most bewildering criminal cases. Until next time, this is Unreal True Crime. Good afternoon, dear audience. As you know, here at Unreal True Crime, we release videos every other day. Many of you have reached out, expressing a desire for daily content, so we've launched a new channel also focused on real-life crime stories called The Crime Storyteller. On the days we don't post videos on Unreal True Crime, we'll upload them there. This means if you're looking for daily doses of the most astonishing real-life crime cases, don't hesitate to subscribe. Without further ado, let's dive into today's case. Erin was born on July 15, 1994, in the United States to unknown parents. Fortunately, she was adopted by Lore and William, a couple from Tennessee. They had 7 children in total, with 5 of them being adopted, including Erin. For Lore and William, adopting was more than a decision. It was about following a divine command to help those in need, especially since some of their adopted children had special needs. For instance, their youngest, Trisha, was born with multiple birth defects. From early childhood, while growing up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Erin showed a remarkable and unconditional love for animals. Her mother cherished memories of Erin being the only one who could make a rabbit walk on a leash as if it were a dog. Kind-hearted and gentle, Erin enjoyed the benefits of having a loving and united family, facing only the usual challenges of any average household. When Trisha passed away at just 3.5 years old, Lore and William helped their grieving children understand the importance of having provided a happy life for her. Over time, Erin turned her affinity for animals into a special talent for taming horses that no one else could tame. She had a pony named Riley at a stable near her home. In 5th grade, she met Jonathan Corwin, a boy a year older than her. Initially, they were not particularly close, but about 5 years later, they started chatting on social media. By then, Erin's protective nature had led her to become the mother of dozens of animals, ranging from fish and guinea pigs to dogs and cats, all of whom she welcomed and cared for. Eventually, Jonathan plucked up the courage to ask her out, choosing her 16th birthday for the date. With her parents' permission, their love blossomed. Their romance, full of poem exchanges and shared dreams, turned them into the quintessential American couple. After finishing high school, Erin found employment at a local tractor supply company, spending her free time with her horse or scouring garage sales with her mother and siblings. Meanwhile, Jonathan joined the Marine Infantry, and without hesitation about their bright future, they married in Las Vegas in November 2012. The following year, Jonathan learned he would be transferred to California. While the prospect excited both him and Erin, They planned to return to East Tennessee as soon as possible. In September 2013, the newlyweds moved to their new home at the Marine Base in San Bernardino County. In turn, the location served as one of the entry points to Joshua Tree National Park. Here, they met new people, such as the couple Connor and Aisling Maliki, who lived with their young son Brian on the ground floor of the same block as Erin and her husband. Amid daily tasks, Jonathan also struck up a friendship with another colleague, Christopher Brandon Lee. Son of Karen Lee and hailing from Anchorage, Alaska, Christopher was a Marine who had been going through tough times after returning from a tour in Afghanistan. He lived on the base with his wife Nicole and their 6-year-old daughter Liberty. Like Erin, the couple shared a love for horses. Soon, the three couples became friends. While their husbands were on duty, Erin, Aisling, and Nicole would visit each other to have lunch and chat. When Jonathan, Connor, and Christopher were at home, they would cook or watch movies and TV shows in any of their apartments. It seemed like each home was everyone's home. Additionally, Christopher and his wife Nicole became horse sponsors at the Roca Blanca Ranch, which also hosted a non-profit organization dedicated to animal care and protection. Isabel Megley owned the site. Naturally, upon learning about it, Erin joined the initiative. Amid their military duties, everything seemed to go smoothly. Initially, Christopher seemed to fit well with the uniform, but over time, other Marines noticed he often displayed a mix of disorder and insolence in handling weapons. An officer later reprimanded him for treating rifles and rocket launchers as if they were toys, earning Christopher a reputation for being reckless. For the Corwins, everyday life, far from their respective families, presented challenges that strained their relationship beyond the honeymoon phase. Their youth also meant they were not fully prepared for the challenges of marriage, often arguing over money and accusing each other of overspending. However, when Erin became pregnant, all disagreements and bitterness between her and Jonathan dissolved. She was so happy with the news that she announced it with a blue and pink post on her social media profile. Unfortunately, just a few weeks later, Erin suffered a miscarriage, which devastated her emotionally. To make matters worse, Jonathan's frequent deployments for military exercises far from the base added physical and emotional distance, as she felt he was unable to console her. Consequently, the cracks in their marriage not only reappeared, but also deepened. During the free time they shared, Christopher had been watching Erin and found it easy to discern the depth of sadness on her face. From that moment, he began spending more time with Erin without Nicole around. On a Sunday night in February 2014, the Lees joined the Corwins in their apartment. Jonathan and Nicole chose to watch a zombie series episode, but Erin, put off by the violence, declined to join. Instead of staying with his wife, Christopher went with Erin to the master bedroom to play video games. Alone, sitting side by side on the floor, they spent a few minutes in front of the screen until one of them paused the game and they looked at each other. Suddenly, they shared their first kiss. Although it lasted only a moment, that intimate gesture changed everything, and they began an affair that quickly escalated in intensity. Soon, Erin and Christopher were talking about leaving their spouses and how great a stepmother she would be to Liberty, whom she frequently cared for. Meanwhile, Nicole sensed her husband's growing distance and soon checked his cell phone, discovering the text messages between Christopher and Erin. Nicole was furious and confronted Christopher with a monologue filled with bitter words that lasted for hours. She didn't stop there, though. She also informed Jonathan about the affair, causing a heated confrontation that lasted through the night. When Erin tried to leave, Nicole, eyes blazing with rage, screamed threats at her. Erin and Christopher ended their affair, but weeks later, they resumed their secret meetings. Around this time, Christopher wrote Erin a poem, urging her not to give up. Meanwhile, unaware of the ongoing betrayal, Jonathan was determined to make his marriage work. Then, on June 22, 2014, as Erin anxiously awaited her mother's first visit to California, she discovered she was pregnant again, this time undoubtedly with Christopher's child. Though she didn't announce it on social media, she told him. Initially, Christopher feigned happiness, but in reality he was displeased, fearing the news could disrupt his plans. Despite promising a future together to Erin, Christopher had no intention of leaving his wife and was greatly fearful of Nicole's potential reaction to the pregnancy. His time in the Marines was nearing its end. On July 4, 2014, he was scheduled to finish his service and then planned to return to Alaska with his wife, leaving behind the tumultuous affair. The next day, Christopher told Isabel that he had been exploring the desert and was thrilled about the interesting things he had found, particularly excited about discovering a hard-to-reach mine shaft. He then asked to borrow a white propane tank that she owned. Isabel had no objections. Meanwhile, he started researching online how to dispose of a body. Then, he messaged Erin to invite her for a surprise romantic evening in the national park. Filled with excitement, Erin immediately texted a friend in Tennessee to share the news. They speculated about the true intentions of her lover and the mention of a surprise element. When her friend sent a text with a ring emoji, Erin admitted she was excited about the possibility of a marriage proposal. The date was set for June 28th. Christopher told his wife he had planned a coyote hunting trip in Joshua Tree National Park with Connor, which conveniently allowed him to take his Winchester .22 caliber rifle. Early that day, he also loaded up the propane tank and gasoline. Before leaving, he mentioned to Nicole that Connor had canceled so he would go alone. Around 7:30 that morning, Erin told Jonathan she was heading to Joshua Tree National Park to explore the trails that she and her mother could later bike on. She kissed him goodbye and said she loved him, leading her husband to believe that their life was returning to normal. Once at the meeting point, Erin faced a harsh disillusionment. Not only was there no dream marriage proposal, but Christopher also made it clear that he had no affection for her whatsoever. She was confronted with a man consumed by anger, with her as the target of his rage. What happened next is largely known only to him, but it is known that he fired shots into the air before using a rope tied to 2 reinforcement bars to strangle Erin, cutting off her air supply. After she fell to the ground, he checked her vital signs and, ensuring she was not breathing, threw her into the mine shaft he had discovered days earlier. Erin fell 76 meters deep. As hours passed with no news from his wife, Jonathan became anxious. He tried calling her at least 50 times and eventually reported her missing the next morning. When the young soldier also contacted his mother-in-law, she suspected that her daughter, who always had trouble with directions, might have gotten lost in the vast national park. Several days passed with no information about Erin's whereabouts. When new information finally emerged, it was far from reassuring. A woman living in a remote area noticed that a car had been parked near her house for several days, which was very unusual. She took pictures of the car and shared them, hoping the owner would appear. These photos turned out to be crucial, as it was discovered that the car belonged to Erin. When the police informed Erin's family that they had found her car abandoned several kilometers north of the park, she felt a stab in her heart. To her, it was almost a certain sign that her daughter had encountered something sinister. The police shared a similar sentiment. From that point, the authorities had 2 tasks, one more challenging than the other. The first task was to gather evidence to prosecute a potential attacker. In this regard, San Bernardino's detectives began to delve into Erin's life and soon uncovered hidden aspects that might have endangered her. It was through their investigations that Jonathan learned his wife's affair had continued in secret. This detail quickly led the police to rule out the husband as a suspect. Instead, Christopher became the focus of their investigation, especially after tire tracks found near Erin's car seemed to match his vehicle. Consequently, on July 1, 2014, Christopher was interviewed by the police. By then, he had hidden his rifle at Isabel's ranch. Christopher initially apologized for not disclosing his relationship with Erin, claiming their interactions had never crossed the boundaries set by their respective marriages. Then, unexpectedly, he claimed that Erin had confided in him about being a victim of domestic abuse. Regarding the Saturday she disappeared, he admitted being in the national park area alone, ostensibly to hunt coyotes, hence firing his gun at rocks. However, the police confronted him with the evidence, leading Christopher to change his story. Without a body, the investigators could not pressure him further. At that point, there was no way to prove Erin was deceased. So after 9 hours lacking sufficient evidence to charge him, the authorities had to let Christopher go. The police were convinced that the story provided by the main suspect was highly unusual and implausible. Later, when the detectives spoke with Nicole, they noted her uncooperative attitude, almost as if she resented the investigation. Christopher was eventually discharged from the Marine Corps, and as planned, he and his wife packed their bags, loaded their truck, and, along with Little Liberty, headed back to Alaska. Meanwhile, the police's second and more daunting task was to locate Erin's remains and prove that this was not a mere case of spontaneous disappearance. The investigation seemed to stall, and the detectives were frustrated. Until Isabel remembered that the week before Erin's disappearance, Christopher had mentioned going to the national park with a friend to explore mines, referencing one that nobody would find. Determined to follow this lead, they sought the help of a local expert, skilled and familiar with the scattered mines across the terrain. Guided by this expert, the investigators and volunteers in California began a meticulous search for Erin in the park. They covered 3,000 square kilometers of wilderness, with 6 different law enforcement agencies eventually getting involved. However, after several weeks of searching, there were no favorable results, leading to the difficult decision to end the operation on Saturday, August 16, 2014. Yet, in a surprising twist of fate on that day, a spelunker noticed a strong smell of gasoline coming from one of the mines. In the final hours of that day, volunteers lowered a bucket with a camera into the mine. At 9 meters down, the oxygen level in the pit was toxic, and further down, near 30 meters, they discovered what appeared to be a body. After a tremendous effort in the late hours of that Saturday in August, the body was retrieved, 2 months after Erin's disappearance. A propane tank was also found at the bottom of the mine, believed to be part of a failed attempt to destroy the victim's body. The remains were airlifted to the local morgue, where, due to advanced decomposition, dental records were used for identification. It was confirmed to be Erin, who had died from asphyxiation caused by an object still clutched around her neck. Additionally, it was revealed that she was pregnant. The shocking discovery that Erin and her unborn child had been killed sent her family on an emotional roller coaster. Though it was the worst possible news, for her mother at least, it was more bearable than the ongoing uncertainty of not knowing her whereabouts. For now, her mother only hoped that her daughter's body would be returned to Tennessee for a proper burial. With Christopher having the motive, means, and opportunity and evidence piling up against him, he was soon arrested by a police officer in Anchorage, and his vehicle was confiscated. Inside the car, beneath the passenger seat, authorities found a homemade object similar to the one found around Aaron's neck. This led the police to interview Christopher's mother. Although she knew nothing about the item and claimed never to have seen it, a search of her home later uncovered a magazine edition featuring an article on Aaron's case. Following Christopher's arrest, the case attracted national media attention. Shortly after, the San Bernardino's police held a press conference to provide details on the case. They mentioned that Christopher was the main suspect in the crime. They also searched Isabel's ranch to her utter astonishment, where they found and seized a rifle owned by Christopher. Further complicating his situation, investigators discovered incriminating search histories on his internet activity. Consequently, Christopher was charged with first-degree murder. On Friday, September 19, 2014, hundreds of candles flickered in silent memory and tribute to Aaron and the unborn child whose life was cut short. Approximately 250 people attended the vigil, many wearing special T-shirts with Aaron's name on the front and a Bible verse on the back. During this time, Jonathan agreed to speak with only one media outlet among the many seeking his comment. In an interview, he expressed his hatred for Christopher's actions, but stated he felt that harboring hatred every time he saw him would eventually consume him. Jonathan revealed that he had learned about the rekindled affair and that his wife disappeared when she went to see Christopher, who was still his next-door neighbor. Part of him wanted to confront Christopher violently, but he refrained, believing it would make him no better than Christopher. Jonathan did not want to be a bad person. The legal process for obtaining justice for Aaron Corwin began 2 years later in October 2016. From the outset of the trial against Christopher, the prosecution easily established his penchant for violence and his motive and opportunity to commit the crime. On Wednesday, October 19th, a forensic scientist testified that a .22 caliber bullet casing was found near the mine where Aaron's body was discovered, and the firing pin marks on the casing matched Christopher's gun. When it was the defense's turn, Christopher was presented as the sole witness. He took the stand and, despite confirming all evidence against him, confessed to killing Aaron. However, he then offered a narrative of the events that was clearly not only false but also desperate. He claimed he had suspected that Aaron had abused his daughter while caring for her, leading to a so-called revelation on that fateful Saturday in the desert. In light of his narrative, Christopher believed he had ample justification for his actions, clearly hoping that his macabre story would result in a lesser sentence. Throughout the trial, he maintained a demeanor of cooperation and calmness. However, the jury did not believe a single word of his account. After just 15 minutes of deliberation, Christopher Brandon Lee was found guilty of first-degree murder. The following month, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In response to the tragedy, Aaron's family and some civic groups advocated for a petition to the Bureau of Land Management, urging them to provide funding and resources to seal abandoned vertical mine shafts, starting with the one where Aaron Corwin perished. Recognizing the enormity of the task and acknowledging that some public areas had already been closed, they requested prioritization for this particular area to prevent similar tragedies from affecting other families. Reflecting on the entire ordeal and the relief of reaching a conclusive verdict, Aaron's mother admitted feeling emotionally and physically drained by the end of the sentencing hearing. She had been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders for over 2 years, with her grief so heavy that she could barely walk. Yet, following the verdict and sentencing, she felt an immense burden lifted off her shoulders, likening her emotional response to the day she finally adopted Aaron. She described years of uncertainty in the adoption process and how all the stress vanished the moment she gave Aaron her last name, mirroring her relief upon hearing Christopher's sentence. As for Jonathan Corwin, Aaron's husband, he chose to shield himself from media overexposure and was taking steps to rebuild his life after the tragic loss. With that, we conclude today's story. Remember to subscribe and like if you appreciate this work. Good night, and see you in the next episode of Unreal True Crime.